I'm Rabbi Zac Kamenetz with the Jewish Psychedelic Summit, joined today by Rabbi Art Green, author of numerous works on Jewish theology and the spiritual quest, co-editor of the new anthology, A New Hasidism, released in 2019, and founding dean and rector of Hebrew College in Boston. Welcome, Rabbi Green.
Thank you, Zach. Great to be with you.
Rabbi Green, one of the reasons we at the Jewish Psychedelic Summit have a Jewish Psychedelic Summit at all is probably because you penned under a pseudonym Itzik Lodger, a foundational Jewish psychedelic text entitled Notes from the Underground on Psychedelics and Kabbalah in 1968. Before we get into some of the content of that essay, could you describe some of the instances of set and setting, your mindset of the time of your psychedelic experiences and the setting in which you found yourself, of the experiences that inspired this work?
Yes, indeed, I'll be happy to. Some of your readers will be delighted and amused to learn that my first psychedelic experience took place at Camp Ramah in New England in the summer of 1965. That was the summer they opened the camp. My very dear friend, long gone and missed, was David Mendelsohn. David Mendelsohn was a junior at Harvard at that time, and he was taking a psychology course with two guys named Leary and Alpert. And they were offering this LSD, this new thing nobody had ever heard of, to their students as a kind of experiment. And he had taken it and said, "You've got to try this." And there we were sitting on the waterfront in Palmer, Massachusetts, and I did my first acid trip there. I later wrote a piece about him. He was a nice-looking fellow with a long face and blonde hair, and I wrote a piece about the old Norwegian fisherman who had taken me on this journey. But that was the very first setting, and then over the course of the next 5 years, I would say, I tripped probably somewhere between 5 and 10 times. There in my dorm room at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I was a rabbinical student, in the apartments of friends in New York, and once memorably at Acadia National Park on Cadillac Mountain, a very wonderful place for the East Coast adventurers to know well. If you don't know it, go there. It's still a place of pilgrimage in my life because of that. And those were the settings. And the set is something else. I had been attracted to studying the Jewish mystical tradition, especially Zohar and Hasidism, already for 4 or 5 years by the time I took acid for the first time. So this was not something brand new to me. Much of what happened to me on acid confirmed things I'd already seen in the sources, and that was what was particularly exciting about it, and that's what much of this essay was about.
Yes. Why did you choose to write anything about your experience at all? Why not keep it as an internal experience? Was there something about what you needed to tell other people that was really important to you at the time?
Well, I was excited. It was transformative. It was a wonderful series of events. It took the insights that I'd been gaining from the Hasidic sources and said, "Wow, these are real. These are real experiences." It translated them into the language of experience. In the Jewish sources, they're so often in the language of theory, in the language of metaphysical claims or structures. And here was something that brought them to life in a new and dramatic way. I wanted to share it with others. In those days, I was very close to someone who remained a lifelong friend, Reb Zalman Schachter. Zalman had taken acid the year before me. And we were the only two people either of us knew who had in common both Hasidism and LSD. And the two of us were tremendously excited. We used to have taped conversations between New York and Winnipeg about this discovery. And we used to send each other pictures of passages in Hasidic books. Look at this one; he must have been on something. And look at that one; this is parallel to something I saw or experienced. And so there was tremendous excitement between us about this breakthrough. Now Zalman remained a true believer. He really believed. Zalman said, "Yes, we will all become licensed LSD practitioners, and that will transform religion, and we will be leading people into these experiences, and rabbi will mean sort of spiritual guide and tripper, and and that was his fantasy, which I shared a little bit for a little while, but then realized was not the case.
Hmm.
But maybe
Well,
that save that for another question.
yeah, I'd love to talk about all of the chavrusa between you two, actually, because this essay was published in 1968, and Reb Zalman's first trip report was published also in Ralph Metzner's volume, The Ecstatic Adventure, the same year.
Same year.
So be
Yeah.
interested to talk about that in a moment. You also chose to publish, even though it was very exciting and wanted to share, at the same time, you felt the need to publish it under a pseudonym, Itzik Lodger, Itzik after your great grandfather, and Lodge after where I believe your family is from. Um,
Well, yes, my great grandfather was I am Avram Itzik.
oh,
I'm
also
named
Avram
after
Itzik.
that great grandfather, and the family lived in Lodge. And I published it in the second issue of Response magazine, which had been founded a year earlier by Alan Mintz, my dear friend,
Yes.
and and he was afraid to publish it. It was illegal. He was publishing an account of something about an illegal substance, and we were all very concerned about the law in those days and about getting in trouble. I was either still in rabbinical school or just out of rabbinical school when I wrote it. I don't remember. I graduated rabbinical school in '67,
Mhm.
and the essay came out in '68. I don't remember exactly when I wrote it. So there, I felt some need for anonymity and protection for legal reasons.
Hmm. And even though it was published under a pseudonym, were you still speaking with your community about, people knew that you had published it, or you kept it to yourself and it was just out in the world in the
Well,
counterculture?
my friends all knew.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, well, reflecting back on this experience that happened more than 50 years ago, these experiences that happened around 50 years ago, in what ways did they influence your work with Chavarat Shalom, which was founded the same year that this essay was published?
Yes, that's a little hard to say. I think there was some fantasy that there would be more of this kind of activity in the Chavurah, but there wasn't.
Hmm.
Chavurat Shalom attracted a rather conventional group of people in some ways.
Hmm.
Um, Unconventional, wanting to create a new sort of community, a new sort of Jewish learning. Very creative, wonderful group of people. But on the psychedelic question, I would say most were pretty hesitant. There were a few people. I think of one person in particular who was a tripper, but not a lot at the beginning, and it was not something we wanted to share communally. If individuals in the group uh, did a trip with one another, that was fine, and not certainly by no means discouraged. No, it was no secret that I had, but it was not a group activity and did not characterize the group.
Hmm. But did it in any way, your personal experiences, did it create a different drive for the founding or the work that was happening in Chavarat Shalom in some way from the inside out?
Well, yeah, from the inside out, my vision of Judaism was very much affected by this. My vision of what the spiritual life was. So we had a group of meditators in the early years of the Chavurah. Four of us would meet regularly to meditate in the mornings, and that was very important and certainly covered by this experience. I didn't know anything about meditation
Hmm.
before LSD,
Hmm.
but began to become interested in it because of that. And I would say the very strong, the kind of mystical devotional side of Chavarat Shalom. I taught Hasidut there from the very beginning, and I think the way I taught Hasidut was certainly influenced by this. In those days, I would give people, even when after 5 years at Chavarat Shalom, I moved on to teach at Penn. I was on the University of Pennsylvania faculty for 11 years. My introduction to Jewish mysticism course always contained a passage from Aaron Watts' The Joyous Cosmology to describe in psychedelic terms what the mystical experience was like.
Hmm.
So the teaching mysticism and teaching psychedelics were integrated for me. I didn't teach psychedelics as a separate subject and wasn't signed up as an advocate, but I certainly used openly psychedelic material to talk about what a description of the mystical experience might be like.
Hmm. Well, let's talk about the essay a little bit. Your essay is a rich and powerful firsthand account of psychedelic experiences being had by someone deeply steeped in the language and imagery of the Zohar, Kabbalistic cosmologies and the mystical yearnings of many Hasidic masters, are there particular insights or images that come back to you from your psychedelic experiences that are in your conscious or subconscious mind and you get to journey back to them from time to time?
Journey back to them experientially is probably not the right term to use, but they have shaped the contours of my mind over these past 50 years, inevitably, indelibly. And all the theology I write about, which is the theology of ultimate oneness, the oneness of the universe and understanding God as the ultimate one, which to which everything else is superficial appearance, was something I learned from reading the Tanya, to be sure, but I also learned it from those psychedelic experiences. Now, you may say, of course, that the prior reading shaped what I experienced. And the interplay between those two was something very complicated and subtle and hard to sort out. But I certainly felt a strong sense of the confirmation of an ultimate oneness of being, and the difference, the distinction between a true underlying reality and realms of illusion, worlds of illusion that flitter by and change, and Loveshtzura, Foshitzura, how do you say that? They take on form and strip off form and enter into another form and yet remain one. The underlying constancy of being. That's right out of my psychedelic experiences.
Well, I think you capture that just so beautifully and artfully. Um, right, there's always that kind of the larger field of the unifying experience and the unity of the divine, and yet you also seem to speak about the many paradoxes that you encountered during these experiences, confirmation and obliteration of inherited forms and language, reality versus perception and deception, the fullness and the paltriness of language to capture direct experience. I'll keep going. The need,
Bravo, bravo. Yes, you
yeah,
got
the need for and the uselessness of maps in the
it.
spiritual quest.
Mhm.
So with all of these, how can Judaism, the Judaism of our moment, encounter and somehow move beyond paradoxical thinking, even without the use of psychoactive compounds?
Why do you have to move beyond paradoxical thinking?
Well, yeah, great.
Paradoxical thinking is rich and wonderful, and it embodies a truth that no resolution of it ever will. That's what dialectical thinking means. That's what in the Zohar you go through one triad of sfirot, and then that brings forth another triad, and that brings forth another triad, and those three triads are there to tell you that the triads go on forever,
Hmm.
and that you're always in this dialectic of resolution and opposition and paradox. So I rather enjoy dwelling there,
Hmm. I
and I'm
think
not looking for a sort of an answer, a resolution of those paradoxes.
yeah, I think what I intend by my question is, without the use of psychedelics, how can you make contact with paradoxical thinking, but then also draw into kind of the unity within paradox? You might get stuck in thinking there's only the binary between formlessness and form, that there's light and dark, and yet that there is some like a greater field holding them. I think that those things become clearer, not only by the use of psychedelics, but certainly with the help of. How can more people begin to encounter this type of thinking of paradox and unity outside of psychedelic use?
You got a good cushion to sit on.
Yeah, that's a good way.
That's in other words, I think meditating on these things, I think taking these paradoxes and spending time with them and delving into them in the mind, and letting the mind go free. Now, what do psychedelics do? They help the mind go freer. Yes, they release some force that's in the mind and allows it to speculate more deeply and roam more freely. It releases some bounds of mental activity. So I think that's a big help, and I'm for it. And I'm delighted that your generation is picking it up, I think, in a more serious and responsible way than much of my generation did.
Mm.
We can come back to that if you want. But but it can be done without psychedelics, of course. I think great mystics and teachers have long done that. And I think you look at Advaita Vedanta. I think there's a great deal of precisely that kind of meditation that we would call about the paradoxical nature of being, reality and illusion, and so forth.
Something that I'm really struck by in this essay, and even just reflecting on it, is um, we often in the psychedelic world talk about different types of experiences, right? There's intellectual or relational, something somatic, something spiritual or messianic even. I find, and maybe you can bring more color to this, I find an absence of Art Green's body in this essay. And I'm wondering if you want to reflect on that for a moment, that there's a lot of uh, ideas and imagery existing within the mind, and the examination of consciousness itself, your consciousness, um, and yet no necessarily feelings of or descriptions of what's happening within your body existing, not existing, being broken into parts. Do you have any memories of those that just didn't make it into this essay?
I do. I think I'm not a very body-oriented person. My body is not my strong suit, shall we say. And I'm a person who lives to a very large extent in my mind. That's good and bad. I'm not advocating it, but I think that is an accurate self-description. And there certainly were bodily sensations, um, and many of them related to fears,
Hmm.
fears of body disappearing, or fear of what's happening to me physically. I think that was there. You know, we didn't have a whole literature to read before we jumped in,
Right.
and really didn't know what to expect on the physical side. I was not a person who had a lot of nausea or sort of those kinds of negative bodily symptoms, but I've seen people who have and know about it. But that wasn't a big issue for me. But the sense of am I still here? Am I still in this body? And what's my relationship to this physical self? But that's again is a mental insight, and that's who I am. I think those are the things. Those are the things that stuck with me.
Yeah, certainly can't change who we are. Are there, speaking about fear or anxiety, um, and also, being in the kind of pioneering moment of this, and creating best practices for people in later generations, is there something that got you through those difficult, challenging moments, or were they just kind of there and you had to be with them as they are until these chemicals started to wear off? Were there
Well,
supports or?
there were hard times. I tripped once in Cambridge, Mass, so maybe circa 1968, with two other guys. Um, One of them freaked out totally, was literally taken away on a stretcher by men in white coats.
Mm.
And it was a rather terrifying experience to be tripping and watching that happen to him. He was fine a few days later. He is now a very well-known Jewish scholar. When I see him at conferences, I can't help but always picture that moment, which seared itself into my imagination. I haven't talked to him about it in 50 years, but but it's very much there in my memory. So you knew the dangers, and of course, I felt I felt even in my own experiences, you were often on the edge of chaos. You were
Mm.
often on the edge of falling into. I understood terms like olam hatohu and sitra achra, the world of chaos and the other side, and how close the border between this side and the other side was, and how and how edge of frightening the whole experience, edge of terror, the whole experience was. Now I was in my late 20s, and those were kind of exciting things to experience. But no, there was a real side of terror about them that went along with the side of course, endless and fantastic beauty and illumination.
Well, we often speak about grounding or anchoring experiences of expanded consciousness within concrete actions and rituals in order to integrate them beyond the primary encounter. In what ways, if any, did you attempt to integrate these experiences into your waking everyday consciousness through Jewish ritual or Jewish time?
That's what I've been doing for the last 50 years, my friend. That's what it's all about. You know,
Wow.
I went through a very bad bout of adolescent orthodoxy. Had rebelled against it and walked away from it totally by the time I was 18. And then at 20, I discovered Kabbalah and Hasidut and began slowly, bit by bit, to come back to some degree of observance. I still loved the literature and loved studying it, but it was only, I think, through psychedelics that I was able to say, yes, I understand. I understand. These are valuable things for concretizing leman tizkeru, so that you remember. Sort of became the key phrase for me. This is all about recreating those moments of peak experience, those moments when you were at Sinai, or those moments when you were at the shore of the sea. Those kinds of things come back, and they are. Once I began reading in the Hasidic sources about how these moments are recreations and not just recollections of the past, I understood that perfectly,
Mm.
because I was able to recreate experiences of places I had been, and understood that they themselves were probably recreations of places that my soul had been in some prior memory. And so the power of ritual somehow is in its antiquity. It's an echo chamber into antiquity. And that antiquity is not necessarily, and this I learned from psychedelics, I think, that antiquity is not necessarily a matter of years, but a matter of going to some inner ancient place. When Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav talks about Sipurei Ma'asiyot Mishanim Kadmoniyot, he's talking about tales of ancient times. He means tales that come from another realm, tales that come from a deeper realm and that reflect a deeper realm of mind. And that's what acid opened me up to. That sense that it's all about a deeper realm of mind, but that realm of mind is a more ancient level of consciousness that lies within us. And deep historical memory evokes that same sense of antiquity, and awakens something in that inner mind. And all those things, I then, of course, was reading Jung and Neumann and all kinds of people who will create the footnotes to all this. But much of that came out of those experiences and the recollection of those experiences, and their influence in shaping me. It took me 50 years to come back to a pretty traditional, normative way of Jewish practice.
Mm.
For a long time, I had to say, no, no, you're not one of them. You're not Orthodox. You don't really believe this stuff. And I would keep a Shabbos and skip a Shabbos, and keep kosher or not keep kosher. And I was back and forth for a very long time. Um, that doesn't mean that the influence of the psychedelics didn't transform me. It did, but I wasn't ready to go back. At some point in my 60s, I said, I think it's time to end adolescence, and not need to rebel and not need to prove to yourself that you are what you are not. And I became very comfortable with a really rather not insanely halakhic, but quite strictly traditional way of Jewish living. And all of that is nourished by the memory of psychedelic experience, and by the recreation of it in my mind. That Liban Tizkru, that the sense that in the second paragraph of the Shema, when after you are lost, when after you wander away and you are lost and the heavens close up and there's no rain, and you are lost from the ground God gives you, then you bind them for a sign on your hand and put them between your eyes. That's the moment when you need ritual. The moment when you're lost is a moment when ritual helps recreate balance, and relocate you in the world. And that function of ritual has been terribly important and enduring for me.
So living on as a living memory, I wonder, given that these experiences happened such a long time ago, and I've heard you say that it's no longer necessary or relevant for your work now, but if you were presented with a set and setting that was favorable for you, do you think that you would have another psychedelic encounter that was, of course, legal and of course, all above board? Would you want to go back to that place, or do you feel like you've learned enough and you're living your life because of them, but don't need to return to it?
So someone I know has been trying to turn me on to ayahuasca for the last couple of years, and I'm not close to the possibility.
Okay.
It would have to be the right set and setting,
Okay.
and to go back to acid once more at this end of the life journey, I'm not at all close to it, but I don't actively seek it out either. You got anything good in mind? Let me know.
We can talk afterwards. I mentioned earlier, and I'm glad that you brought it up about, it sounds like Camp Ramah is, of course, is central to all Jewish experience in America. Good to know now that it's central to the Jewish psychedelic experience as well. Because, Reb Zalman, he recounts on his day off
Yes.
from Camp Ramah that he goes to this ashram with Tim Leary and has his first psychedelic experience. He dictates it to someone. He writes. There's about 40 pages or more. Have you read his trip report?
Long time ago,
A
yes.
long time ago. I'd be interested to know if the tapes, the sending back and forth, if that is still extant material, either in your archive or his, that we could continue to learn from this psychedelic chavrusa.
I don't know what's in his archive. I don't think I had the tapes until fairly recently, but can't seem to locate them anymore. And I have an idea they're gone.
Okay.
Yeah.
There seems to also be videotape somewhere of Tim and Reb Zalman from that evening, but
Oh,
we
good.
haven't found it yet.
That would be quite something.
We're coming to the end of our half hour. There's obviously a lot more to talk about, but maybe that'll be for the conference in 2022. Um, what would be your final message or eitzah to give to this new generation of Jewish psychonauts?
Well, first of all, I want to say what a delight it's been to have this conversation. I haven't had this particular conversation with anybody in a very long time, so I'm glad you asked these questions. I'm glad you gave me a chance to do some thinking about it in a more systematic way. Um, I think the time is right now. We got overly we were overly willing to let ourselves be scared
Hmm.
by the active campaign against psychedelics that took place in the early 1970s on. And that campaign happened and succeeded because we turned to them in somewhat irresponsible and wild ways. I think the sense that the medical community is so much involved in this effort now, and that it's being done in a much more scientific and responsible way, with a lot more knowledge about brain chemistry and the relationship between that and inner experience than we had 50 years ago. I have a sense that this is the right time. So proceed with caution, but proceed. That's my advice.
Thank you. And just to finish, I would be really honored if you could read one of my favorite passages from this essay. It's 298 in A New Hasidism, the Roots volume. This is Itzik Lodger writing about his experience. Please read.
I encounter my own consciousness at any given moment in a psychedelic voyage only in terms of its content. My mind, now more than at any other time, is filled to overflowing with fast changing images and countless interweaving patterns. In the face of this, the continuity of consciousness from one moment to the next is to me the greatest of miracles. All is changing, and my mind seems constantly on the verge of bursting into the shrapnel of its own perceptions. And yet somehow I remain. Space, time, and consciousness, insofar as they can be distinguished from one another, are all going through this same infinitely majestic but terrifying process. They're all rushing constantly toward the brink of bang, disintegration. But just as I reach the far limits of existence, they turn around and smile. Relax, you haven't moved at all. And then I know, Olam Shana Nefesh, space, time, and mind, says the Sefer Yetzirah, are playing the same games.
Thank you very much. Rabbi Art Green, thank you again. We're so honored to have you here in this video and giving the Birkat Siyum, the final blessing of the conference. We'll be very honored to have you with us for this first year and many more years to come.
Amen. Thanks.
Amen.
Great to talk to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.